Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed the industrial mop bucket down the sterile hallway of Mercy General Hospital. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the linoleum floor that gleamed under his meticulous work. It was past midnight, and the night shift was in full swing. The hospital felt different at night, quieter, more honest somehow. The daytime hustle and pretense stripped away, leaving only the raw truth of people trying to make it through another day. He'd been working the graveyard shift for 3 years now, ever since his divorce left him with nothing but a studio apartment and a beat-up Honda Civic. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady, and steady was all Marcus needed. He'd learned to find peace in the rhythm of his work: mop, rinse, repeat. Floor by floor, room by room, making things clean again. The elevator dinged softly as he reached the 3rd floor. That's when he first saw her. She was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and tired eyes that seemed too old for her face. She wore the same blue custodial uniform he did, but hers hung loose on her thin frame like she'd lost weight recently. She was standing by the supply closet, staring at a clipboard, with the kind of concentration that came from fear. The fear of messing up when you couldn't afford to mess up. "You must be the new girl," Marcus said, his voice soft in the empty hallway. She jumped slightly, then turned toward him with a nervous smile. "Yeah, I'm Sophia. First night." "Marcus." He extended his hand, noting how cold her fingers were when she shook it. "Don't worry about the learning curve. Took me weeks to figure out their system." Sophia nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something fragile about her, like she was holding herself together with sheer willpower and not much else. Over the next few nights, Marcus learned pieces of Sophia's story. She'd moved to town 6 months ago, running from something she didn't talk about. No family, no safety net, just her and whatever courage had brought her this far. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the rough side of town, the kind of place where the rent was cheap because nobody else wanted to live there. She was a good worker, thorough and quiet. She never complained, never asked for help, never talked about herself unless directly asked. But Marcus noticed things. The way she ate nothing but crackers and peanut butter for lunch. How she walked everywhere because she didn't have a car. The dark circles under her eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping much. "You doing okay?" he asked one night as they worked adjacent rooms in the cardiac wing. Sophia looked up from wiping down a bedside table. "Fine. Why?" "Just checking. This job can be tough when you're new." She nodded and went back to her work, but Marcus caught her wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The night everything changed started like any other. Marcus was cleaning the break room when Sophia came in for her meal break. She sat at the plastic table and unwrapped what looked like a single sandwich, white bread with something thin between the slices. "That's dinner?" Marcus asked gently. Sophia's cheeks flushed. "I'm not that hungry." Marcus had heard that kind of lie before. He'd told it himself during the worst months after his divorce. He sat down across from her, his own lunch bag untouched. "Sophia, can I ask you something personal?" She tensed. "I guess." "How far behind are you on rent?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia's face went white, then red, then she put her head in her hands. 3 weeks, she whispered. "They gave me notice yesterday. I have until Friday." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He thought about his own small savings account, the money he'd been slowly accumulating for no particular reason. Just security, he'd told himself. Something to fall back on. "How much do you need?" Sophia looked up sharply. "I can't." "No, I appreciate it, but I can't take money from you." "I'm not giving it to you," Marcus said. "I'm loaning it to you." Big difference. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know when I could pay you back." "When you can. No interest, no timeline. Just pay me back when you're able." Sophia cried harder then, the kind of crying that comes from relief mixed with exhaustion. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." Marcus thought about that question. Why was he doing this? Maybe because he remembered what it felt like to be desperate and alone. Maybe because someone had helped him once, when he needed it most. Or maybe because Sophia reminded him of something good in the world that was worth preserving. "Because you'd do the same for someone else," he said finally. That Friday, Marcus met Sophia at her apartment building to give her the money. It was a run-down complex with peeling paint and broken security gates, the kind of place where people minded their own business because everyone had something to hide or escape from. Sophia's apartment was on the second floor, accessible by an outdoor staircase that creaked under their weight. She unlocked her door with shaking hands, revealing a space that was clean but nearly empty. A mattress on the floor, a folding chair, a small TV on a cardboard box. The kitchen was just a hot plate and a mini fridge. "It's not much," Sophia said, embarrassed. "It's yours," Marcus replied. "That makes it everything." He handed her an envelope with $1,200 in cash, enough for rent and a little extra for groceries. Sophia stared at the envelope like it was something miraculous. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said. "Believe it." Sophia threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. She smelled like hospital disinfectant and strawberry shampoo, and for a moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years, useful, needed. "I promise I'll pay you back," she said into his shoulder. "Every penny, I swear to you." "I know you will." As Marcus walked back to his car, he felt lighter than he had in months. The money was gone, but something better had taken its place. Purpose, maybe, or just the simple satisfaction of knowing he'd made a difference in someone's life. The next week at work, Sophia seemed like a different person. She smiled more, stood straighter, even hummed sometimes as she worked. She'd bought groceries and started bringing actual meals for lunch. The dark circles under her eyes faded as she caught up on sleep. "You saved my life," she told Marcus one night as they cleaned the pediatric ward together. "You saved your own life," he replied. "I just helped with the rent." Sophia laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her. It was a nice sound, light and genuine. "Still," she said, "I won't forget this. Ever." Marcus believed her. He believed in the goodness he saw in her, the resilience that had brought her this far. He believed in the promise she'd made and the gratitude in her eyes. He believed until he didn't. Marcus lived in a small apartment complex across town, the kind of place where working people lived when they were trying to get back on their feet. His unit was on the first floor, with thin walls that meant he knew more about his neighbors than he wanted to. The guy next door was named Jake, mid-20s, loud, always on his phone making what sounded like business deals, but were probably just him trying to impress whoever would listen. Jake worked construction during the day and spent his evenings either at the gym or at bars, coming home late with different women who would leave before morning. He drove a lifted pickup truck with oversized tires and a sound system that could wake the dead. Everything about Jake was performance, from his protein shakes to his designer clothes to the way he talked just a little too loud about his latest conquest or business opportunity. Marcus had lived next to Jake for 8 months without exchanging more than basic pleasantries. Jake was the kind of guy who saw Marcus's quiet demeanor and modest lifestyle as weakness, making jokes about the janitor to his friends when he thought Marcus couldn't hear. That dynamic might have continued indefinitely if not for what happened on a Tuesday night in March. Marcus was coming home from a double shift, exhausted and looking forward to nothing more than a shower and sleep. As he fumbled with his keys outside his door, he heard voices from Jake's apartment. Not unusual, Jake was always entertaining someone, but something about one of the voices made Marcus pause. It was Sophia. Marcus stood frozen with his key halfway to the lock. He could hear her laughing, the same light laugh she'd made at work the week before. Then Jake's voice, deeper and more animated than usual, clearly trying to impress. Marcus told himself it was a coincidence. Maybe Sophia lived in the complex and he'd never noticed. Maybe she was visiting someone else and had run into Jake. There were a dozen innocent explanations. But innocent explanations don't usually come with the sound of a woman laughing at midnight in a single man's apartment. Marcus unlocked his door and went inside, telling himself it was none of his business. Sophia was a grown woman. She could spend time with whoever she wanted. The money he'd loaned her didn't come with strings attached or expectations about her personal life. Yet as he lay in bed listening to the muffled voices through the thin wall, Marcus felt something cold settling in his stomach. Not jealousy exactly, but something worse. The slow, creeping realization that maybe he'd been foolish. Maybe the person he'd believed in didn't actually exist. The voices continued until almost 3 in the morning. When Marcus finally fell asleep, his dreams were full of empty envelopes and broken promises. The next night at work, Sophia was the same as always. Friendly, hardworking, grateful. She asked Marcus how his day had been and told him about a difficult patient room she'd had to clean. She seemed completely normal, which somehow made everything worse. Marcus found himself studying her face, looking for signs of deception or guilt. But Sophia was either an excellent actress or genuinely unaware that he knew anything. She treated him the same way she always had, with warmth and respect and what seemed like genuine affection. "You seem quiet tonight," she said as they worked side by side in the ICU. "Just tired," Marcus replied. "You've been working too hard. You should take a day off sometime." The casual concern in her voice made Marcus's chest tight. How could she sound so sincere while lying to his face? Or maybe she wasn't lying. Maybe what he'd heard wasn't what he thought he'd heard. Maybe he was jumping to conclusions based on paranoia and his own past betrayals. Marcus wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe in Sophia, in the story they'd been building together, in the idea that good deeds were rewarded with good people. But 3 nights later, belief became impossible. Marcus had switched shifts with another custodian and was working the evening rotation instead of his usual graveyard shift. He got home around 10:30, earlier than he'd been home in weeks. The parking lot was mostly empty, just his Honda and Jake's pickup truck. As Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, he could hear music coming from Jake's place. Not unusual, but as he got closer to his door, he heard something else. Sophia's voice, clear as day, coming from right next door. "You're such an ass," she was saying, but she was laughing as she said it. "Yeah, but you like it," Jake replied. "Admit it. Maybe a little." Marcus stood with his key in his hand, feeling like the ground was shifting under his feet. There was no mistaking it now. No innocent explanation. Sophia was in Jake's apartment at 10:30 on a Thursday night, laughing and flirting like they'd known each other for months. Marcus managed to get his door unlocked and stumbled inside. His apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in. He sat heavily on his couch and stared at the wall that separated him from Jake's place. Through the thin drywall, he could hear everything. Sophia's laugh. Jake talking about his construction job and his plans to start his own company. Sophia asking questions, sounding impressed. Jake putting on music, the sound of the couch creaking. Marcus got up and went to his bedroom, but the sound followed him. His apartment shared more than just a wall with Jake's. It shared a heating system, shared plumbing, shared the kind of construction that meant privacy was an illusion. He lay in bed listening to Sophia fall for exactly the kind of guy she'd complained about at work. The flashy type, the loud type, the type who talked big and delivered small but knew how to make it sound good. Marcus thought about the $1,200, money he'd saved carefully, dollar by dollar, from a job that paid just enough to cover his basic needs. Money he'd given freely, without conditions, because he'd believed in something beautiful, because he'd thought Sophia was different. But she wasn't different. She was just another person who confused kindness with weakness, who took help from the quiet guy while chasing excitement with the loud one. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but every sound from next door felt like a small betrayal. Sophia's voice, animated in a way he'd never heard at work. Jake's laughter, confident and possessive. The sound of 2 people discovering each other while the man who'd made it possible lay alone in the dark, listening. The betrayal wasn't that Sophia was with someone else. Marcus had no claim on her, no right to her affection or attention. The betrayal was smaller and somehow worse. It was the way she'd looked him in the eye every night at work and never mentioned that she'd found someone new. The way she'd continued to talk about her struggles and her gratitude while secretly building a life that didn't include him. It was the lie of omission, the performance of continued vulnerability while she was already moving on. Marcus lay awake until the sounds next door finally stopped, sometime after 2 a.m. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of empty envelopes and broken promises, and woke up feeling like something essential had been carved out of his chest. The 4th night was the worst. Marcus had tried to avoid coming home early, working late at the hospital, and then driving around town for an hour before finally returning to his apartment complex. But the sounds were there again. Sophia's voice, Jake's music, the unmistakable rhythm of 2 people who had become comfortable with each other. This time, Marcus could hear them more clearly. Jake was telling Sophia about his weekend plans, something about a party with his construction crew. Sophia was telling him about her shift at the hospital, complaining about the supervisor and laughing about the strange things people left in patient rooms. It was the intimacy of it that hurt most. The way Sophia shared details about work that she'd never shared with Marcus, despite working beside him every night. The way she seemed relaxed and happy in a way he'd never seen her at the hospital. Marcus realized he was hearing Sophia's real personality for the first time. The person she was when she wasn't performing gratitude or playing the role of the struggling woman who needed help. She was funnier than he'd known, more sarcastic, more alive, which raised the question, who was the Sophia he knew at work? Was she real at all, or just another performance? Marcus sat in his kitchen, listening to the woman he'd helped fall in love with his neighbor, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not anger exactly, though there was some of that. Not jealousy, though that was there too. It was something deeper and more permanent. Disillusionment. The realization that the story he'd been telling himself about goodness and gratitude and people helping people was just that, a story. The real world was messier, more selfish, more disappointing. Marcus had learned this lesson before, in his marriage, in his previous job, in a dozen small betrayals over the years, but somehow he'd let himself forget. He'd let Sophia's tears and promises make him believe again in something beautiful. Now he remembered why he'd stopped believing in the first place. The sounds from next door continued until almost dawn. Marcus lay in bed listening, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't seem to stop. Each laugh, each whispered word, each creak of Jake's cheap furniture was another piece of evidence that he'd been played for a fool. When Marcus finally fell asleep, the sun was already rising, and he dreamed of nothing at all. The fifth night broke something inside him. Marcus came home at his usual time to find Jake's truck gone from the parking lot. Good, he thought. Maybe he'd have one night of peace, one night to sleep without the soundtrack of his own stupidity playing through the walls. But as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, he heard familiar voices. Jake's truck might have been gone, but Jake wasn't. Neither was Sophia. This time, Marcus could hear them clearly through his bedroom wall. Not just talking, but laughing, whispering, making the kind of sounds that left no doubt about what was happening. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed and put his head in his hands. He felt like he was suffocating, like the walls of his small apartment were closing in. The woman he'd helped, the woman who'd cried in his arms and promised never to forget his kindness, was next door falling into bed with a man who wouldn't have loaned her $5, let alone $1,200. The worst part was how happy she sounded, how free, like she'd been holding herself back all this time and finally found someone worth letting go for. Marcus got up and walked to his kitchen, then to his living room, then back to his bedroom. There was nowhere to go in his small apartment that would block out the sounds, nowhere to hide from the truth of what he was hearing. He thought about banging on the wall, about confronting them, about doing something to make his presence known. But what would be the point? Sophia didn't owe him anything beyond the money she'd promised to repay. She had every right to sleep with whoever she wanted. The problem wasn't what she was doing. The problem was what it revealed about everything that had come before. Had Sophia been planning this from the beginning? Had she spotted Jake's truck in the parking lot and decided Marcus would be useful for paying her rent while she worked on landing a better catch? Or had she genuinely been grateful until something shinier came along? Marcus didn't know which possibility was worse. He ended up spending the night in his car, driving aimlessly through the empty streets until sunrise. When he finally returned to his apartment, Jake's truck was gone, and the building was quiet. Marcus showered and got ready for work, moving through the motions like a man in a trance. He felt hollow, scraped clean of something essential. The kindness that had motivated him to help Sophia felt foolish now, naive. The goodness he'd seen in her felt like projection, wishful thinking from a man who wanted to believe the world was better than it actually was. At work that night, Sophia greeted him with the same warm smile she always wore. "How was your day off?" she asked. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. She looked the same as always, tired but determined, grateful but not quite happy. The same person who'd cried when he'd offered to help with her rent. "Fine," he said finally. Sophia tilted her head, studying his face. "You sure? You look upset about something." The concern in her voice was so perfectly performed that Marcus almost believed it himself. Almost. "I'm fine," he repeated. They worked their shift in relative silence. Sophia tried several times to start conversations, but Marcus kept his responses short and professional. He could feel her watching him, trying to figure out what had changed. What had changed was everything. The story was over. The beautiful lie about good people helping each other had been exposed for what it was, a transaction. Sophia had needed something. Marcus had provided it, and now she was free to move on to someone more exciting. The money didn't matter. Marcus had written it off the moment he'd handed it over. But the betrayal of trust, the performance of gratitude while secretly building a life elsewhere, that mattered. That changed everything. As they finished their shift, Sophia lingered by the supply closet. "Marcus, did I do something wrong?" He looked at her standing there in her oversized uniform, looking small and worried, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "No," he said, "you didn't do anything wrong." And that was the truth. Sophia hadn't done anything wrong by any reasonable standard. She'd simply been human, selfish, opportunistic, more complicated than the grateful victim Marcus had wanted her to be. The fault was his for believing in something that had never existed in the first place. Marcus went home that morning and slept deeply for the first time in days. When he woke up, Jake's truck was back in the parking lot, and the cycle was ready to begin again. But Marcus was done listening. He was done believing. He was done expecting anything from anyone except exactly what they were willing to give, which was usually less than they promised and never what you hoped. The lesson was learned. The story was over. The sixth night, Marcus didn't go to his bedroom at all. He could hear Sophia and Jake through the walls from the moment he got home. Her laugh, his voice, the unmistakable sounds of two people who'd grown comfortable with each other's bodies. Instead of torturing himself by listening, Marcus set up his laptop on his kitchen table and put on headphones. He'd been working on an online certification program for building maintenance, something that might help him move up from custodial work to a better position. It was slow going after long shifts at the hospital, but it gave him something to focus on besides the betrayal playing out next door. As Marcus worked through modules on electrical systems and HVAC repair, he realized something had shifted inside him. The sharp pain of the last few days was settling into something harder and more permanent. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. This was colder, more final. It was the death of expectation. Marcus had spent 3 years rebuilding himself after his divorce, learning to be alone without being lonely, learning to find satisfaction in simple work and quiet evenings. He'd been content with that life until Sophia came along and reminded him what it felt like to be needed, to matter to someone. Now he was remembering why he'd chosen solitude in the first place. People disappointed you. They took what they needed and moved on to something better. They made promises they couldn't keep and performed gratitude they didn't feel. Sophia wasn't unusual in this. She was just human. The mistake had been Marcus's, for expecting anything else. Through his headphones, Marcus could barely hear the sounds from next door, but he knew they were there. Sophia, who'd cried in his arms about her struggles, was next door with a man who probably didn't even know she'd been behind on rent. Jake, who called Marcus the janitor behind his back, was enjoying the company of a woman Marcus had saved from eviction. The irony was perfect, really. Almost elegant. Marcus worked on his certification until dawn, then went to bed as the building finally fell quiet. He slept without dreams and woke up feeling empty but clear. The story was over. The lesson was learned. Time to move on. At work that night, Sophia tried again to figure out what had changed. "Are you mad at me about something?" she asked as they cleaned adjacent rooms in the cardiac wing. Marcus looked up from mopping. Sophia was standing by a patient bed, clutching a bottle of disinfectant, looking genuinely confused and a little hurt. "No," Marcus said. "I'm not mad." "Then why won't you talk to me anymore?" Marcus considered how to answer that. He could tell her he knew about Jake. He could confront her about the deception, demand to know why she'd continue to perform vulnerability at work while building a relationship elsewhere. But what would be the point? Sophia would apologize, explain that she hadn't meant to hurt him, maybe even convince herself that she'd done nothing wrong. She'd promised to be more honest in the future, and Marcus would pretend to believe her, and they'd both go on with the comfortable lie that people were better than they actually were. Marcus was tired of comfortable lies. "There's nothing to talk about," he said finally. Sophia stared at him for a long moment, then went back to her cleaning. Marcus could feel her watching him for the rest of the shift, but he kept his attention on his work. Mop, rinse, repeat. The simple rhythm that had carried him through worse things than this. As they finished up that morning, Sophia made one more attempt. "Marcus, I don't know what I did, but if I hurt your feelings somehow, I'm sorry." Marcus looked at her standing by the supply closet, clutching her time card, looking small and worried. 3 weeks ago, he would have reassured her, told her everything was fine, maybe even asked if she needed anything else. Now he just nodded and walked away. The story was over. The characters had played their parts. Time for everyone to move on to whatever came next. Marcus spent the 7th night in his apartment working on his certification program, headphones blocking out the sounds from next door. He was making good progress on the coursework, and the building supervisor had mentioned there might be an opening in maintenance soon. It would mean day shifts, better pay, and an apartment somewhere quieter. A new story, built on realistic expectations and hard-earned wisdom. Marcus was learning not to listen for what wasn't there anymore. Marcus spent the next few days in a strange state of numbness. Not depression exactly, but something like emotional hibernation. He went to work, did his job, came home, studied for his certification, and went to bed. The sounds from Jake's apartment continued, but Marcus had learned to tune them out. Sophia kept trying to bridge whatever gap had opened between them, but her efforts felt increasingly hollow. She'd bring him coffee during breaks, ask about his weekend plans, share small frustrations about work. Marcus responded politely but distantly, giving her nothing to build on. He could see her getting frustrated, then confused, then hurt. Part of him felt bad about that, but a larger part of him recognized it as another performance. Sophia's distress at losing his attention was real enough, but it wasn't about missing his friendship. It was about losing the validation of his admiration, the comfort of having someone who saw her as noble and worthy of rescue. Marcus was done providing that service. On Thursday night, Sophia cornered him in the break room during their meal break. "Okay, enough," she said, sitting down across from him at the plastic table. "Something's wrong, and I want to know what it is." Marcus looked up from his sandwich. Sophia's face was set in determined lines, like she'd worked up the courage for this conversation. "Nothing's wrong," he said mildly. "Bullshit. You've barely spoken to me in a week. Did I say something? Do something? Because if I did, I want to make it right." Marcus studied her face. She looked sincere, genuinely concerned. Maybe she was. Maybe Sophia had compartmentalized her life so completely that she didn't see any connection between her behavior with Jake and her relationship with Marcus. Maybe she honestly couldn't understand why the man who'd loaned her rent money might feel betrayed to discover she was sleeping with his neighbor. Or maybe she understood perfectly and was hoping he didn't know. "You don't owe me anything, Sophia," Marcus said finally. "And I don't owe you anything either. We work together. That's it." Sophia's face crumpled slightly. "That's it? After everything we've been through? What have we been through exactly?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it again. What had they been through, really? A few conversations, alone, some shared work shifts, nothing that added up to the friendship Sophia seemed to think they'd had. "You helped me," Sophia said quietly. "When I had nobody else, you helped me. And you'll pay me back when you can. End of story." "Is this about the money? Because I can start paying you back now if you want. I've been picking up extra shifts and—" "It's not about the money." Sophia leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Then what is it about?" Marcus looked at her sitting across from him, still performing concern, still trying to manage the situation. He thought about telling her the truth, about the thin walls and Jake's loud voice and the sound of her laughing in ways she'd never laughed with him, about the difference between the grateful, struggling woman she played at work and the confident, happy woman he'd heard next door. But the truth would only create more drama, more explanations, more performances. Sophia would apologize and explain and probably even mean it. She'd promised to be more honest, more considerate, more whatever she thought he wanted her to be. and none of it would change the fundamental fact that people were who they were, not who you wanted them to be. It's not about anything, Marcus said. People move on, situations change. It's fine. Sophia stared at him for a long moment, then sat back in her chair. Something in her expression shifted, a kind of recognition. You know, she said quietly. Marcus didn't answer. About Jake. You know about Jake. Still nothing from Marcus. Sophia's face went through several emotions: embarrassment, guilt, defiance, then something like relief. I didn't plan it, she said. I didn't plan any of it. The rent thing, meeting you, meeting him. It just happened. Marcus nodded. Things happen. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't hurt me. Then why? Because there's nothing to talk about, Marcus said, standing up. You're an adult. You can sleep with whoever you want, date whoever you want, build whatever life you want. None of that has anything to do with me. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But we're friends. No, Marcus said gently. We're not. He left her sitting at the break room table and went back to work. The rest of the shift passed in silence between them, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not tense or angry, just empty. The silence of a story that had ended. Marcus drove home that morning as the sun was coming up, thinking about new beginnings and realistic expectations. His certification program was almost finished. The maintenance position was still available. He had enough saved for a deposit on a better apartment, somewhere with thicker walls and fewer complications. It was time to move on. Past time. The sounds from Jake's apartment that night were muted, like Sophia and Jake were being more careful. Marcus worked on his final certification modules with a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the coursework. He was finishing something more than just a program in building maintenance. He was finishing a version of himself that believed in rescue stories and grateful recipients and the idea that good deeds created lasting bonds. That man was gone now, replaced by someone more practical, more realistic, more alone, but also more honest about what alone actually meant. Marcus submitted his final exam at 3 a.m. and went to bed in perfect silence. 2 weeks later, Sophia approached Marcus in the supply room with an envelope in her hands. I want to start paying you back, she said, holding out the envelope. Marcus looked at it without taking it. I told you, when you can afford it. I can afford it now. I've been picking up extra shifts, and Jake's been helping with groceries and stuff, so I have more money available. The mention of Jake's name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Sophia seemed to realize what she'd said, her cheeks flushing slightly. I've been managing my money better, she corrected. Marcus took the envelope and looked inside. $200 in 20s, crisp from the bank. This is more than you need to pay, he said. I wanted to pay extra, for interest, or just because you were so kind to me. Marcus closed the envelope and held it out to her. I don't want interest, just the principal, when you can afford it. Sophia stared at him. You won't even take my money now? I'll take what I'm owed. Nothing more, nothing less. Why are you being like this? Marcus looked at Sophia standing in the supply room, holding an envelope full of money that probably came from Jake's wallet, asking why he wouldn't accept her guilty overpayment. Like what? He asked. Cold, distant, like I'm some stranger. Aren't you? The question seemed to hit Sophia like a physical blow. She stepped back, clutching the envelope. After everything we've been through? After I told you things I've never told anyone else? After you saved my life? Marcus considered that. Had Sophia told him things she'd never told anyone else? He remembered their conversations, the careful way she'd revealed just enough vulnerability to justify his help without sharing anything truly personal. He'd never learned where she'd come from, what she was running from, why she'd chosen this town or this job. He'd never met any of her friends, or learned about her family, or discovered what she wanted from life beyond making rent. He'd known Sophia's story, but not Sophia herself. The difference was clearer now. I helped you with rent, Marcus said. That's not the same as saving your life. It felt the same to me. Then maybe you need better perspective on what your life is actually worth. Sophia flinched like he'd slapped her. That's cruel. It's honest. Sophia stood there for a long moment, still holding the envelope, tears starting to form in her eyes. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Not regret exactly, but recognition of his own capacity for causing pain. Keep the money, he said more gently. Pay me back when you actually can afford it, not when someone else is covering your expenses. Jake's not covering my expenses. He's just helping out because he cares about me. Good for him. Don't you care about me at all? Marcus looked at Sophia's tear-streaked face and felt the question settle in his chest like a weight. Did he care about her? Of course he did. You couldn't help someone, couldn't see them cry with relief and gratitude, couldn't work beside them night after night without caring on some level. But caring and trusting were different things. Caring and expecting were different things. Marcus cared about Sophia the way you might care about a wounded bird, hoping it would heal and fly away, but not surprised when it pecked the hand that fed it. I hope you're happy, Marcus said finally. I hope Jake treats you well and you get everything you want. But nothing. That's it. I hope you're happy. Sophia searched his face for something more, some sign of the man who'd offered to help her when she had nowhere else to turn. But that man was gone, replaced by someone more careful, more guarded, more realistic about what help actually bought you. I'll find another way to pay you back, Sophia said quietly. When you can afford it, Marcus repeated. Sophia nodded and left the supply room, still clutching the envelope. Marcus went back to organizing cleaning supplies, methodically checking inventory against the list on his clipboard. 2 days later, he got the maintenance position. The day Marcus received his promotion to the maintenance department, Sophia was waiting by his car in the hospital parking lot. It was 6 a.m, the sun just beginning to cast long shadows across the asphalt. Sophia looked like she'd been waiting for a while, leaning against the driver's side door with her arms crossed, still wearing her custodial uniform from the night shift. Congratulations, she said as Marcus approached. I heard about the promotion. Marcus unlocked his car and set his work bag in the passenger seat. Thanks. Day shift, right? Better pay? Right. Sophia nodded, looking down at her feet. So I guess we won't be working together anymore. Probably not. They stood in the parking lot in the pale morning light, two people who'd shared something important that had somehow turned into nothing at all. Marcus could see Sophia struggling with what to say, how to bridge the gap that had opened between them. I'm sorry, she said finally, for whatever I did to mess this up. Marcus looked at her standing there in the morning sun, small and tired and genuinely sorry for something she couldn't quite name. He thought about telling her the truth, that she hadn't messed anything up, that she'd simply been human in ways he'd been too naive to expect, that the fault was his for believing in a story that had never been real. But the truth would only hurt her more, and there was no point in that. You didn't mess anything up, Marcus said. Things just run their course sometimes. I still owe you money. I know where to find you. Sophia managed a weak smile. I guess you do. Marcus got in his car and started the engine. Through the windshield, he could see Sophia still standing there, looking like she wanted to say something else. But some conversations didn't have good endings, only endings. Marcus drove away without looking back. His new position in maintenance came with a desk in the basement of the hospital, a set of keys that opened every door in the building, and responsibility for keeping the place running. It was steady work, solitary work, the kind of job where you fixed things that were broken and prevented things from breaking in the first place. Marcus found peace in the routine. There was something honest about a broken pipe or a faulty electrical outlet. Problems had solutions. Work had results. You could see the difference you made. 3 months into his new job, Marcus moved to a small house on the other side of town. It had a front porch, a backyard, and neighbors who minded their own business. The rent was higher than his old apartment, but he could afford it now, and the silence was worth the extra cost. He settled into a new rhythm. Work during the day, home in the evenings, weekends spent on small home improvement projects. It was a quiet life, but an honest one. No drama, no complications, no expectations that could be disappointed. Marcus thought about Sophia sometimes, wondering how things had worked out with Jake, whether she'd found whatever she was looking for. But the thoughts were distant, like remembering a movie he'd seen once, rather than something that had happened to him. That might have been the end of the story, except for what happened on a Tuesday afternoon in September. Marcus was replacing a broken fluorescent light in the hospital's administrative wing when he heard a familiar voice in the hallway. He looked through the open door of the office he was working in and saw Sophia walking past with a woman in a business suit. Sophia was dressed differently. slacks and a blouse instead of the custodial uniform, her hair styled, carrying a leather portfolio. She looked confident, professional, like she belonged in the administrative wing rather than cleaning it. Marcus stepped back from the doorway, not wanting to be seen. Through the glass partition, he could hear pieces of their conversation. "Really appreciate the opportunity," Sophia was saying. "I know my experience is mostly in custodial, but I'm a fast learner and I've been taking business classes online." The woman in the suit was nodding, asking questions about Sophia's availability and references. It sounded like a job interview. Marcus finished changing the light fixture and packed up his tools, thinking about the conversation he'd overheard. Sophia was moving up, moving on, building the kind of life she'd probably always wanted. Good for her. As he loaded his cart to move to the next repair, Sophia appeared in the doorway. "Marcus?" He looked up from his tools. Sophia was smiling, but it was a careful smile, uncertain of its reception. "Sophia, how are you?" "Good, really good. I'm interviewing for a position in patient services. Entry level, but it's a start." "That's great. I've been taking classes at the community college. Business administration, still working custodial part-time, but I'm hoping to transition out soon." Marcus nodded. "Sounds like you have a plan." "I do." Sophia paused, fidgeting with her portfolio. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for helping me when I needed it most, for showing me that someone could be kind without expecting anything in return." Marcus looked at Sophia, standing in the doorway of the office, dressed for success, talking about kindness without expectation. She seemed to mean it, seemed to genuinely believe that was what had happened between them. Maybe it was better that way. Maybe the story Sophia was telling herself was more useful than the truth. "I'm glad things are working out for you," Marcus said. "They are. And I know this might sound strange, but losing your friendship was a wake-up call for me. It made me realize I needed to stop expecting other people to save me and start saving myself." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like understanding. Maybe Sophia had learned something from their story after all, even if it wasn't the lesson he'd thought he was teaching. "That's not strange," he said. "That's growth." Sophia smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I have something for you." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out an envelope. Not thick like the last one, but substantial enough. "What I owe you," she said. "Every penny, no interest, no extra. Just what I borrowed." Marcus took the envelope and looked inside. $1,200 exactly. Bills that looked like they'd been saved carefully, dollar by dollar, over months of working 2 jobs and taking classes and building a better life. "You didn't need to pay it all at once," he said. "Yes, I did. For me, I needed to." Marcus nodded and put the envelope in his pocket. Thank you. For everything." Sophia started to leave, then turned back. "Marcus, I know I hurt you somehow, even if I never understood how. I'm sorry for that." Marcus looked at Sophia standing in the doorway, sincere and sorry, and moving on to better things. The anger and disappointment he'd carried for months had faded to something softer, something more like acceptance. "You didn't hurt me," he said finally. "You just taught me something I needed to learn." "What's that?" "That people are exactly who they are. Nothing more, nothing less." Sophia considered that for a moment, then nodded. "I guess that's not such a bad thing to learn." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's not." Sophia left him standing in the office with his tools and his $1,200 and the quiet satisfaction of a story that had found its proper ending. Not the ending he'd expected, but the one that made sense. Marcus finished his repairs and went home to his quiet house, where the silence was perfect, and the only expectations were the ones he set for himself. He deposited Sophia's money in his savings account and went on with his life, older and wiser and more careful about the stories he chose to believe. Sometimes people grew. Sometimes they learned. Sometimes they paid their debts and moved on to better things. And sometimes that was enough. That evening, Marcus sat on his front porch with a beer and thought about beginnings and endings, about the difference between helping someone and saving them, about the wisdom that came from having your expectations properly adjusted. Sophia would be fine. She'd probably get the job in patient services, finish her degree, build whatever life she was meant to have. Jake would probably be part of that life or he wouldn't. But either way, it wouldn't be Marcus's concern. Marcus had learned something valuable from their story, even if it wasn't the lesson he'd thought he was teaching. He'd learned that kindness didn't create obligation, that help didn't guarantee gratitude, and that the best gifts were the ones given without expectation of return. He'd learned that people were exactly who they were, nothing more and nothing less. And surprisingly, he'd learned that was enough. The money was repaid, the debt was cleared, the story was over. Marcus finished his beer and went inside his quiet house, where the only sounds were the ones he chose to make, and the only expectations were the ones he could control. It was a good life, an honest life, a life built on realistic foundations and hard-earned wisdom. Some stories didn't have fairy tale endings. Some stories just had endings that made sense. This was one of those stories. Marcus turned off the lights and went to bed, sleeping soundly in the perfect silence of a man who'd learned not to listen for what wasn't there anymore. In the morning, he'd go to work, fix what was broken, and come home to a life that was exactly what it appeared to be. No more, no less. And finally, that was enough. The story was over. The lesson was learned. Time for whatever came next. But first, a good night's sleep in the kind of silence that could only be earned through experience, disappointment, and the hard-won wisdom that came from having your expectations properly aligned with reality. Some stories ended with justice. Others ended with growth. This one ended with understanding. And sometimes, understanding was the best ending you could hope for.